We just saw that the ego point of view developed after our mind appeared to split off from God's. After we became aware of something other than God, we soon came to understand that we were perceiving ourselves separately from God. We're here, God's over there, or at least somewhere else. Now remember, until that time, our mind had had only one thought and one experience. We were one with God. We were God. We could create more of what we were and expand indefinitely. We knew of no other experience. But now we were having a different experience, and our mind had to figure out how to deal with it. We had the thought that we could go play by ourselves, or basically create by ourselves, without having to do it God's way. So after we began experiencing what it was like to be separate from God, we began to develop a viewpoint in our mind that explains that experience. That is the ego's viewpoint. We also still retained our original viewpoint that we were one with God, but it seemed much less important in light of what we were experiencing, which was separation from God. In fact, since the original viewpoint conflicts with our newly adopted viewpoint, our mind suppressed the previous viewpoint of oneness with God. The ego can be defined as a point of view that results from Christ's belief that Christ has become separated from God. As that point of view developed, we strengthened our identification with the ego's point of view. This was our choice. So Christ's belief in separation and the resulting choice to identify with it is responsible for the ego's entire existence. That means that if Christ had a change of mind and stopped believing in the separation, then Christ would no longer need the ego and would discard it. It also means that God is not responsible for our misthought. God is not responsible for our belief in the ego, nor is he responsible for our illusory existence in this illusory universe. And God is not responsible for our failure to choose the Holy Spirit instead of the ego. The Course points out that the ego is a wrong-minded attempt to perceive yourself as you wish to be rather than as you are. And we've also distorted God's will and substituted our own. From chapter 21, all that the ego is an idea that it is possible that things could happen to the Son of God without his will, and thus without the will of his Creator, whose will cannot be separate from his own. This is the Son of God's replacement for his will, a mad revolt against what must forever be. The Course makes the point that the ego is really nothing. It is only a dream of what you really are, a thought you are apart from your Creator, and a wish to be what he created not. It is the thing of madness, not reality at all. A name for namelessness is all it is. The Course sums up the ego by answering a few questions. Where there was darkness, now we see the light. What is the ego? What the darkness was. Where is the ego? Where the darkness was. What is it now, and where can it be found? Nothing and nowhere. Now the light has come. Its opposite has gone without a trace. Where the evil was, there is now holiness. What is the ego? What the evil was. Where is the ego? In an evil dream that seemed real while you were dreaming it. The ego is a belief in unreality, in something that doesn't exist. It is the result of a choice based on a mistake. It's a fairy tale, like Pinocchio. It wants to be a real boy, but it's made of wood. It can't live. It only appears to live as long as its maker believes it's real. And, like Pinocchio, the ego lies. So when you choose the ego, you're choosing nothing. Nothing but a stack of dead wood. The ego's point of view in a nutshell is that we're separate from God, and that by pulling ourselves away from God, we've committed the ultimate sin. We have rebuked God. We feel really, really awful about that. Everything was perfect, and we just threw it all away. We rejected God's love, and we feel guilty. This guilt is inherent in the ego's point of view of separation, that the separation is real and we caused it. Moreover, because we feel guilty, we believe God is going to punish us, and we're afraid. We've sinned, we're guilty, and we fear punishment. That is the basis for the ego's point of view. And remember, this point of view isn't reality. The separation never occurred. It was only a dream. The ego's biggest fear is that Christ will have a change of mind and stop believing in separation. Since the ego, remember, it's just a point of view that we adopted. Since the ego depends on our belief in separation, the ego cannot exist without our belief. This is why the Course repeatedly speaks of the power of the mind to choose. If we continuously choose the Holy Spirit's point of view instead of the the ego will cease to exist. It will disappear into the nothingness from whence it came. The ego senses this, so its top priority is self-preservation. That affects all the advice that the ego gives us. Its very existence depends on our continued choice to follow it. The ego fears for its existence because it realizes that we made our original choice for the ego in a panic and confusion, triggered by guilt and fear. The ego realizes that if we calm down, we could make a simple choice in our mind and the ego would be gone. So the ego works to distract us and keep us in a panic to prevent us from making a choice for the Holy Spirit, or even realizing that we have a mind that could make such a choice. The ego seeks to make us mindless, so we're not only not aware that we made the choice to believe the ego, but we're also not aware that we can undo that choice. The ego also attempts to make us mindless by suppressing and then projecting the guilt out of our mind and onto other people and ourselves. Our mind is unable to deal with the guilt that it feels, so it has to repress or deny it. The mind simply pretends that the guilt is not there. The guilt is pushed away into our unconscious mind so we don't think about it, but it still causes us problems, as the Course points out. Guilt is always disruptive. Anything that engenders fear is divisive because it obeys the laws of division. If the ego is the symbol of separation, it is also the symbol of guilt. Guilt is more than merely not of God. It is the symbol of the attack on God. Once guilt is denied and repressed, projection is inevitable. The term projection may be used in several similar ways. First, the ego, before it made bodies, projected the universe stars, galaxies, quarks, dark matter, and all that stuff. This macrocosmic projection was the perfect backdrop for the second projection, bodies. The ego's bodies are the perfect objects of our projection of guilt on an individual or microcosmic level. Projection on the microcosmic level simply means to impose your own guilt on someone or something else, so that the guilt you are feeling over your attack on God, you see in somebody else instead of in you. To understand why a mind resorts to protection, think of an angry person who may slam his fist on a table or throw something or kill somebody or kill a lot of people. But an angry, guilt-ridden mind can't do any of those things. It can't do anything at all. It can only think. So it turns to projection, because that's the only way of thinking that will address the guilt and anger that it feels. And thinking is the only thing a mind can do. So we're projecting our guilt from our mind onto what appear to be other people. This is in keeping with the ego's fundamental doctrine that what you do to others, you have escaped. Projection makes perception. We project a world and images in it. We have forgotten that we are projecting the universe because the ego has placed a veil of forgetfulness in our minds, so we don't remember that we're projecting. In heaven, we had an experience of oneness. We didn't have to learn that because we experienced it. The Course calls this knowledge. We suppressed our memory of this knowledge, and we've replaced it with perception. Perception is always ambiguous and never stable. Everything shifts in the changing world we perceive. Projection makes perception. Projection is the mind's main defense in support of separation. As the Course explains, projection will always hurt you. It reinforces your belief in your own split mind, and its only purpose is to keep the separation going. It is solely a device of the ego to make you feel different from your brothers and separated from them. The process begins by excluding something that exists in you but which you do not want, and leads directly to excluding yourself from your brothers. Thus, we seem to be surrounded by guilty people. But despite the ego's best efforts, projection really does nothing to get rid of your guilt, because we just see it outside of ourselves. The ego is really just recycling the guilt we feel by projecting it. We see the guilt in others, which just makes us angry at them instead of ourselves. In reality, they aren't even there. They are our own projections, symbolizing the guilt that we feel inside. The Course refers to our projection as an outward picture of an inward condition. So the inevitable result of our projection is that it fails to make us feel better. However, projection helps the ego accomplish its objective of keeping us mindless by focusing our attention on what's going on outside of us rather than paying attention to the mind where the problem is in the first place. Ken Wapnick explains projection's successes and failures. Projection is an incredibly successful dynamic that has worked since the beginning of time. Indeed, it is the beginning of time as well as of the world. Very, very effective, except that it does not work. It is very effective because it does not work. The ego does not want it to work, because if we were really able to get rid of sin by projecting it onto someone else and seeing it in that person, there will be none left in us to project. If there were no guilt left, we would not need the ego and would dissolve it. Our relationships with the people and other objects of our projection are what the Course calls special relationships. The purpose of projection is to get rid of guilt, so we see it outside of ourselves. The purpose of special relationships is to provide another person on whom we can project our guilt. We project our guilt onto those with whom we enter into special relationships for the very same purpose, to make someone else feel guilty so we will feel innocent. Special relationships are substitutes for our holy relationship with God. The ego forges special relationships to keep us mindless so that we will not be aware that we can change our mind. Every special relationship you have made has, as its fundamental purpose, the aim of occupying your mind so completely that you will not hear the call of truth. We'll talk about the call of truth made by the Holy Spirit in the next part, the true self.